Started. Can you guys hear me out of this thing? Yes, I think you can. I have two mics on, so I should be twice as loud. Great. There's nothing behind me at this. Okay. Well, thank you guys all for coming tonight. My name is Warren Katz. I'm the Master of Ceremonies for the moment. This is a very unusual and exciting group we have here together. How many people are here because of MIT Enterprise Forum? Okay, how many people are here due to MIT Sandbox? Okay, how many people here are due to Techstars? And how many people here due to the Autonomy Meetup? Okay, all right, great. Well, as one could probably imagine how this happened, the Enterprise Forum sent out a note, hey, we're thinking about having a meetup on drone technology, blah, blah, blah time. And then the Sandbox people sent a similar sort of note, hey, can we come by to meet with your companies about drone stuff and have a nice drone night? And we were planning on doing it too, and so obviously it made sense to pool them all together. There's, I think, 300 people who RSVP'd for tonight, which is fabulous, and I have agreed to orchestrate. So again, my name is Warren Katz. I'm the Managing Director of the Techstars Autonomous Technology Accelerator with the U.S. Air Force. We have a lovely panel of guests tonight that are going to chat in a minute, and I'm going to make an introduction to each and let them each tell you about who they are and why they're here. We're going to go about 90 minutes here tonight, and then upstairs on the 4th floor in the R&D section, there's an exhibit of about 20 companies in the drone, counter-drone space, the 10 from my program, as well as I think 8 or 9 more. So we'll be delighted to have you come upstairs and kick the tires on the stuff going on upstairs. So the purpose of this evening was to get together the vast different communities in autonomy, drones, counter-drones, all that kind of stuff for one fact-filled or rousing evening of regalement. What I'm going to do is have each of the speakers give an introduction to themselves and why they're here. If they have a little bit of a position statement, we'll give them a little opportunity to say why they're so interested in the UAS or counter-UAS space. And then I will ask a couple of questions of the panel, and if there is still any time left, which there probably will be, I'll open up to questions from the floor. Okay? So first, Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody hear me okay? All right, so I'm Captain Steve Lawver, Active Duty Air Force. Pilot by trade, spent 4 years with Air Force Special Operations Command down at Hurlburt Field, Florida. Fly an aircraft called the U-28. Anybody heard of it? That's how we like it. So it's a kind of a lower key, it's a civilian-looking aircraft, and we like it that way. Just last October, I moved up to DC to work full-time with an organization called AFWorks, which is a new innovation program for the Air Force that's trying to better work with brilliant folks like you in the non-traditional kind of business sector. And I've been doing that for a few months now. I'm the Director of Technology Accelerators, working here with Warren, and it's been a pleasure so far. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Ted?
My name's Ted Steiner. I work for Draper right across the street. I've been an employee at Draper for almost 3 years now. I'm the software development lead for the Draper MIT combined team for the DARPA Fast Lightweight Autonomy program. So for those that aren't aware of that program, the FLA program is trying to fly drones at very high speeds through unknown, unmapped, GPS-denied environments. So we're all about drone autonomy, onboard sensing, communications limitations, GPS-denied limitations. Before I was at Draper, I had an office right in this building, actually, when I was in John Leonard's lab in CSAIL, and also advised by Jeff Hoffman. So I got my PhD in 2015 from here at MIT.
Great, Scott?
Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Van Broekhoven. I am a group leader at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. The group I lead is the Advanced Systems and Capabilities Group. One of the focus areas in the group is autonomy, particularly in the area of small unmanned aerial vehicles. So we do quite a bit of work in counter-UAS is one space. We do a fair amount of work in sort of large quantity integrated systems between sort of a large number of small vehicles, and how do you do that in a smart, intelligent way for defense and national security applications. So we're very focused on sort of pushing the envelope on small UAV development. I'm here primarily because we're interested in how we can better collaborate with some of the small companies in this room, and also how we can maybe better help connect some of their technologies to some of the people we work with in the DoD. So thank you very much.
Chitra?
I'm Chitra Savanathan. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I'm Chitra Savanathan. I work for the Advanced Concepts and Technologies Group in Raytheon. We are looking to kind of improve our processes and kind of formality with how we partner strategically with startups, looking at everything from kind of co-development opportunities to strategic investment opportunities. Similar to Scott, we're trying to figure out a better bridge to the smaller, more innovative companies. Historically, Raytheon's done a lot with a lot of the larger class UAS systems, and as the threat evolves, we're looking at better, more agile ways to be able to address these smaller class threats, and work closer with industries so that we can look at domestic solutions and overseas solutions. So we're looking at more comprehensive ways to kind of focus as a community across all of these threat verticals and how that kind of maps in with like a startup investment approach.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. Before we move on, I actually forgot to thank the people involved with those other organizations that made tonight possible. Marin, I think you're here. You're the Sandbox woman. Say hello to everybody. That's Marin Katoner. She was responsible for the Sandbox participating. Amy, are you here? Amy Goggins? Amy's not here from MIT Enterprise Forum? No. She's okay. She's actually doing real work. Okay, that's all right. Okay, I'm here from Techstars. I know me. Okay, where's Sam? Sam Timiner? Where are you? There you are. Okay, Samson, the MIT Autonomy Meetup. So these are the people who said, yeah, let's pull all together and do one big thing. Let me introduce myself. I'm Warren Katz. I said Managing Director at Techstars Autonomous Technology Accelerator with the U.S. Air Force. I'm just a little bit of my background. I am an entrepreneur, founder of a software company in the military modeling and sim space, Mach Technologies, sold it, became an angel investor, kind of quasi-retired for a bunch of years at Techstars here in Boston. About 2 years ago, the Techstars folk got a call from whom we call the four captains of the apocalypse. That's how they're known in the Pentagon. Steve is one of the four captains of the apocalypse. These are a group of four bright-eyed, bushy-tailed captains that just said, look, we can't buy stuff from small startup companies in the same way we buy stuff from Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, and the very best stuff is coming out of these tiny startup companies. So we have to do something else. We have to do something differently. And if you've been around the Pentagon for a while, you've probably heard a speech like twice a day, 3 times a day about, yes, we must do things differently, but never without any concrete proposal for exactly what to do differently. So these guys came up with this brilliant idea of let's start an accelerator, another Techstars accelerator, to access the really smallest and youngest of startup companies, which is prescient because if you want to engage with an ecosystem like the guys at In-Q-Tel discovered, if you guys know In-Q-Tel, they're the CIA's venture capital firm. They decided that to enter the startup ecosystem, you have to do it in a way that the startup companies are comfortable with, that they understand. So In-Q-Tel, about 15 years ago, started up a venture capitalist. CIA started up a venture capitalist, In-Q-Tel, fabulously successful. Well, the Air Force had the same brilliant idea. Let's enter the startup ecosystem with a mechanism that startup companies are comfortable and familiar with, namely the accelerator. So they went to Techstars, started up a Techstars accelerator, funded it. But that's only half the reason for the Air Force wanting to do this, accessing the startup companies. The other half is that the Air Force wanted to retrain itself how to buy things from tiny startup companies without killing them or turning them into defense contractors, okay? So it was an aha moment of if we want to interact with these small companies, we must do it in a way that they are familiar and comfortable with, not in the classic way we shove down the large defense contractors' throats. So that's the reason I came out of retirement to do this job, just for that one change or attempt, we'll see where it goes, but the attempt of a change of business mindset on the part of at least this part of the DoD. So with that, I am going to kick off the very first question. So my program, the focus area is counter-UAS technologies or counter-drone technologies. Let me ask a quick question of the audience. Who has seen the Slaughterbots video? Okay, it's probably about half the audience. If you have not, I strongly recommend you to go home and watch it. It's quite amazing. It's a fictitious video made up by an institute that's very worried about the potential misuse of autonomous vehicles. So with that, I want to kick it off with the first question. My question is, do you think the United States will be ready and capable to defeat the first fully autonomous non-state actor assassination attempt? That is my question.
Tough question.
Okay, so we don't have to go in order. Whichever one of you would like to jump in and answer first. So I'll give you a few more seconds by tap dancing a little bit. The video that half of you have seen is a fictitious video about a not so ethical defense contractor that has made a huge system of microscopic drones that essentially can target individual people with facial recognition and kill them. Okay, the entire skit is about how this company has come out with this amazing new weapon system that can be programmed to kill Democrats versus Republicans, or people with different skin colors, or people with individual names. So that's kind of the premise of this whole dark video. So anyway, I gave you a few more seconds to think about it. Jump on in.
I'll hem and haw on this one for a little bit because it's a tough question. First, the current way we're addressing counter-UAS, or largely addressing counter-UAS, won't work for fully autonomous systems, right? So most of the direction in the DoD right now is soft kill, right, jamming systems. So that doesn't work against a fully autonomous system. Slaughterbots looks at these very little miniature drones that can go and autonomously do facial recognition and go after people. And right now, with the way technology currently is, you can't do it in that size form factor, right? You're talking about much bigger systems that are not as covert, that are much harder to get into confined spaces and to do things of that sort. So I think we're a long ways away from that. I think hit to kill sort of Slaughterbot style type things is a ways off. I think that larger autonomous systems that try to have impact on dismounted soldiers or troops or other force structures is a real risk and a real threat. I think that we are working on potential solutions to that right now, but whether we are going to be able to keep up with the pace of innovation in that space, I think is a very good and valid question. I would say, your question was, the first time the adversaries try to do that, will we be able to respond? I think yes, because the adversaries aren't going to get it right the first time, right? But whether or not we can keep up with sort of their learning curves, with our learning curves, is a very good question and a valid question. I'm not sure if I could, I'm not sure if the answer is yes.
Scary answer. Okay. Who else?
Has
I'll
anyone
jump in
seen?
on that one real
Oh,
quick
you go
too.
first.
Go ahead.
You
So I think it depends on if we're talking about an attempt on the U.S. soil versus overseas. I think overseas, we might actually have our act together somewhat in some cowboy fashion, and something will be done, and some response will be, however much collateral damage is associated with it would be unknown, but that would probably be, I think it'd be fair to assume that something would be there as a response. I think a domestic threat, we would probably have an issue on who does what when, and we're likely to have more issues and have less success, just given the fact that there's a lot of lack of coordination along with lack of capability.
Has anyone seen the show Black Mirror? The B episode? This kind of reminds me of that. So I am quite confident that I'm not qualified to speak at the same technological level as the folks on the panel. I can talk to some of the philosophical and kind of programmatic perspective of this. And the disclaimer for me is, even though I'm at the Air Force, my perspectives are just opinions, and they do not represent the opinions of the Air Force in the US. So don't go saying the Air Force says that we're all doomed. Thank you. So the question of will we be prepared? My fear here is that this is a non-attributional weapon, the way you described it, right? So today, if someone were to conduct a terrorist attack, ostensibly, they're going to either get caught or they're going to be killed, right? That's kind of their lot, the decision they're making. But with this kind of technology, now you have the ability to kind of hide behind a device that maybe won't get traced back to you, and you can conduct 1, 2, 3, 4 of these things. So that is my fear. I think that we tend to rally together as a nation, especially when it comes to technological development, when there is an existential threat. the first attack might be the existential threat that then drives us to really invest some resources into this. There's a lot of smart folks on it already, but it's very difficult to control all of the skies, all of the radio waves, everything that's out there, unless you were a police state, and I don't think that's what we want either. So it's a difficult challenge. I hope it doesn't ever become a reality, but something to think about.
I guess it's left to me now.
It's up to you.
This is a really hard question, but I think if we break it down a little bit in terms of the tech, there's two parts. First, there's when is it going to happen? And then the second is, are we making progress towards that? So I don't really work on counter-drone. I work on autonomous drones, but I can say that we're not there yet. So I think that we're right on the cutting edge of what's possible with unmanned aerial vehicles, and we're a ways away from a targeted assassination attempt. But I think that there are cases overseas where there have been terrorists manually controlling drones. So it's probably something that the world is unfortunately progressing towards. So I think we're probably years out from this being a reality, as far as like a drone that can go through an unknown, poorly mapped environment like a building, gain access. So it's very difficult, as you can guess, for a drone to get into a building if the doors are closed. So in all of the tests that we've been doing where we fly drones in and out of buildings, we just have open garage doors. So simple things like closing doors even can make this difficult. On the other side, there's been, like you said, a lot of work, anti-drone work that's focused on more like radio jamming. But I have seen some examples of shooting down drones with nets, with other kinetic means. So I know it's something that we're making a lot of progress on. Right now, I think that it's probably actually pretty close. Both sides kind of working towards almost adversarial, those of us working on autonomy and those of us working on counter-autonomy, working against each other.
You're all wrong. Let me introduce you to the X-47B. No, great. Those are all great answers. Appreciate that. I'm going to press on a point that Steve made a little harder. So one of the arcs of technology that at least I tried to pursue in my program, there's a couple of companies in my cohort that are involved in this, is securing the supply chain such that forensically after the fact, it's not non-attributional if a drone does commit a nefarious act, its chain of ownership can be indelibly traced. There's one company in my cohort that's doing this through the blockchain, another one that's doing this through invisible nanoparticle inks in order to covertly mark parts at the source when they're made in the factory and trace them through the blockchain such that it becomes relatively difficult to make or buy a drone that you cannot trace. What do you think is the probability or possibility that 3D printing technology might override the ability to covertly and securely trace parts to the supply chain? Is that too complicated a question?
I don't think it's a very complicated question. It's a matter of
You're
whether
calling
we
me a
can...
simpleton? Is that what you're doing? Okay.
Yes.
All right. You can...
It's a matter of whether we can 3D print drone parts, right? I think I'm not sure about the status of 3D printing electronics, but as far as the physical parts, most of our drones are 3D printed. As far as the motor windings, I think that that's probably still going to need some level of manufacturing.
Yeah, I mean, if you're worried about the problem you talked about before, right? You're talking about the onboard processor, the GPU, whatever it is, that's going to be the thing you have to trace through potentially. But those aren't just used in drones; they're used for other applications. And then, honestly, whatever it is, 75% of the commercial market's DJI now, right? So it's a lot of it, and those are the ones that are being used overseas by bad guys and other things. So how do you get into that supply chain? How do you make sure? So it's sure you can make sure that the drones that we're selling are traceable and attributable, but is everyone else's the same? I mean, drones are largely cell phone parts, So I mean, how much are you trying to trace? What kind of specific attributes, capabilities are you trying to follow becomes challenging.
So I'll take a different angle at that. I think that the 3D printing will make it much more challenging, but you'll end up having, you'll use more classic kind of forensic techniques than to have to figure out the pedigree of the part, right? So you might find that we have to spend more time invested in understanding, like for a 3D printed part, you know, did that particular plastic originate from materials that tend to be sourced in Syria, right? So you end up going into a different material science problem on the forensic analysis that might become valuable as you look at ownership and supply chain and pedigree of that particular asset.
I think it comes down to, do you trust the foundry? And you already touched on this a bit. You know, who is the source of the part? And can we get them to play ball with this process, right? And what is the trusted node at which we do implement this kind of tracking? And I think there's going to be an amount of spillage that we cannot track. Now, that said, if other people don't know what can and cannot be tracked, then you induce a little bit of risk on their part. So they now know that there's a chance that they will be tracked. And that might kind of go into the decision process. But I think it's almost impossible that we capture everything.
That's great. That's great. Chitra, I really liked your going up the food chain and marking the filament in 3D printers. So that is like the radioactive signature of different plutonium, you know, from each nuclear reactor. You can tell what day it was made and based on its radioactive profile. That you could do the same thing with filaments for 3D printers. Interesting. All right, fascinating. Okay, my last question to the panel before I open up to questions from the floor. Given that we are approaching a world where the systems that we are going to have to defend against are extremely low cost, commercial grade, bought off the shelf, buy it from Amazon or place an order to a 3D printer and have Shapeways print you your weapon and send it on its mission. The U.S. Defense Industrial Complex, which has been very comfortable in the era of 20-year-long programs to build huge, humongous things that have large area effect, are actually going to be downplayed or going to be you know, reduced or defocused on due to the necessity for extremely inexpensive, extremely lightweight defeat mechanisms. How do you believe the U.S. industrial complex is going to react, and what will it take to actually turn that I guess Chitra is the best on the panel to answer that, but what's it going to take to get that Queen Mary to turn?
All right, so I'll bite. Yeah, it's going to be challenging, right? I think we deal with this every day because the government contracting process and methods don't work for those smaller price points and that more commercial analog marketplace, right? So then how do you create the right incentive for the people like Raytheon to bring you products and capabilities that are pseudo-consumer oriented at those type of price points with those type of service mechanisms? And it's a difficult challenge because in the consumer world, there's a different relationship between what you get for that service, for the price you pay, and what the government would expect for the contractor to service that product. So you can't say, hey, look, you're going to have like a 90% type of SLA service, or you're going to have only a certain amount of help to support your threat mission in order to service your product, and say, but I need to have like a fail-proof product and solution set for this threat that I'm mitigating. So unfortunately, the odds are that you have the larger defense industrial base that's going to lobby heavy against trying to move down to that consumer model. But if the contracting environment creates analogs within the contracting environment that then kind of benefit a contractor to take some risk in certain areas, then you could see a contractor open up and say, okay, in certain areas, there might be parts of a contract where I can kind of do more experimental contracting at different price points for a different type of service model, for a different deployment model, that I can actually be incentivized to work with smaller companies that have a different risk profile and do some different type of technology insertion. But until there's a blend between the expectation on that service delivery and the contract environment, it's really hard for that industrial base to be incentivized to move forward. I work that problem on a daily basis in my day job.
I think that's a brilliant answer. And I think a lot of times it's easy to point the finger at one organization or another and say, go innovate. But the environment that we set is kind of key for that. So I appreciate maybe we can chat more about that afterward. But I'll take this chance to kind of on a platform for actually why I'm here. So I want to convey the why. For me, it's the reason that I'm excited to be here with you all, the reason we're working with Techstars in the first place. And that's that we want the brightest minds in the world working on our problems with us, right? So things that affect national security, the well-being of the world. And there's a lot of brilliant people out there, but we want to get more of them more selfish, right? So, and historically, the people who have the most brilliant people on their team, working the most effectively together are the ones that win, the ones that survive conflict year after year. So to put this in context, I want to think about a timeline a little bit here. And typically, money is an indicator of talent concentration. So back in the 1960s, for every $1 that private industry was putting into research and development, so basic, advanced, and applied, we were putting in 2 as the federal government. And that resulted in some really cool innovations. GPS, cellular technology, lithium-ion battery, you name it. The beginning of Silicon Valley was actually funded by some government projects. In the 1980s, we saw a 1-to-1 swap. And then fast forward to today, for every $1 that we put in, you guys, private industry, are putting in 3. Right, so for us to keep our edge and keep up with the fast pace of technology growth, we need to continue to look for new and creative ways of working with private industry so that we can do that. Now, a subset of private industry that I'm particularly interested in is the startup ecosystem. So if you think about it, they are fast, lean by definition. They are not encumbered by existing business models or shareholders or customer bases. So they're free to kind of really think outside the box. And that enables some companies to actually topple entire industries, right, to disrupt the market. So that is an area that I would like to work with more. If you look at a lot of the large companies, Google, Intel, Salesforce, they've created venture arms whose job is to go out and find these emerging pieces of tech and pull them into their ecosystem so that they can be the disruptors instead of getting disrupted, right? And the military-industrial complex is doing it too. I know a lot of the large organizations have their own venture arms where they're scouting these pieces of tech. And so with that in mind, I kind of refine that why just a little bit. My personal mission is to get startup founders in what we call non-traditional companies. So folks who are not used to working with the government to one, want to, and 2, be able to work with the government. And my job is to identify and aggressively remove the barriers to working with us that are out there. I've talked enough already, but maybe in the Q&A or afterward, we can talk about the barriers we've already identified, how we're removing them, and why I honestly feel that now more than ever, the government is open for business to work with folks like you. But yeah.
FFRDC folk, any thoughts on this?
Gosh, it's a hard question. I think both the speakers so far did a better job on this than I'll be able to. I mean, I think one question in this space, right, particularly if you're talking about the counter-UAS space and small and expensive systems, is it's not solely or maybe even primarily going to be a military application, right? So I think a lot of it's going to be domestic, and there are going to be a lot of other players. There's going to be a substantial commercial market for it. So, you wonder, what the connection is there and what the relationships are going to be and how the Department of Defense gets their technologies that they need for their applications as well. But there may be a larger ecosystem than just the military ecosystem that feeds into this market too.
I'm an algorithms person, not a policy person, but Draper is not an FFRDC. We're an independent nonprofit, and we have an office that's fairly new called Sembler that's set up to work with some of these same problems you're talking about, helping startups get connected with maybe Draper expertise or Draper test capabilities or even government contracts that maybe they don't want to go for independently. They want to be a part of a team. So we've got that contracting structure in place for startups that are interested in getting involved with the defense contract industry. The other thing I'd say too is I can see, kind of bouncing off what you said, I can see the military spending a lot of money on anti-drone capabilities. If it really takes small missiles to take down drones to defend our overseas bases, then I'm sure that's what they'll end up using. But if you think about things like here in Boston, the 4th of July celebration where you've got 500,000 people crammed in along the Charles River, some of those types of approaches would never work. So I think that the smaller approaches are going to be really necessary.
Very good.
When I go back on this, the other thing that might be worth exploring, and I'm, taking my Raytheon hat off, just talking, brainstorming here, that, we think of counter UAS and a lot of these different things going on as, an infrastructure problem. We have different ways of looking at the tangible things we buy and the things we deploy for infrastructure. But maybe we should look at, is there a different way to think about it that's more like the cybersecurity risk problem, where there's like a shared risk-reward system between, commercial entities and the government? And is there a different model that we can look at where we're all kind of in because of the way that this threat could impact all of us, right? So there might be a different analogy we can play off of in a different way you structure the environment, so that the government and industry and basically all the infrastructure we all use and support in our communities can actually benefit, but share the risk and share the cost, and thereby kind of reducing the overall cost to the government. But maybe there's a different model we should be looking at collectively.
That was great. I'll throw one more little tidbit on the fire here. There was a brilliant Navy admiral who unfortunately passed away a few years back, Arthur Sibrowski, who came up with this brilliant analogy to the operational OODA loop. I think many of you might have, OODA, OODA, is a military term for observe, orient, decide, and act. And whichever army on the battlefield, whichever force on the battlefield had a tighter OODA loop was going to be the natural winner. Okay, this was if you can observe quickly, orient yourself quickly, decide quickly what to do, and then take an action and keep spinning in this loop faster than your enemy, even if he had more assets than you, you'd probably defeat him. So we're in a position now where we're in an economic OODA loop war, where our enemies can innovate faster at a lower cost, so simply destroy us by attrition. If we're firing $1 million missiles at $1,000 drones, we are obviously, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, doesn't take an algorithms PhD to figure this out. Back of an envelope is good enough. So perhaps that very structure that you're talking about is sort of an economic OODA loop type analysis of the battlefield, which would put us, it would impact the other question I asked about the defense industrial complex quite hard. So I'm going to throw one more question to the panel. I promised there would only be three, but I thought of one more that I think might lighten up the evening a little bit if it's been a little dark. What technology that's coming out right now is really exciting you in the autonomy space? What's your most optimistic? What's the thing that you really get your blood going, get your blood boiling?
You're working on?
I would say it's like a class of algorithms and technology. It's the neural networks that I find to be the most exciting work going on right now. They're scary in many ways because we don't know exactly what they're learning and what they're doing, so it's hard to debug and understand what actually happens. So when you put them into a real system, it's going to be really hard to really diagnose exactly what happened. But what makes me excited about them is that there's been a lot of progress on understanding that. So there's been a ton of research recently on things like visualizing what's going on inside of neural networks, and they're becoming much more of a science. So I think that we're going to see a lot coming out of that area.
Okay, AI, DNNs, awesome, good.
Yeah, no, I think it's the same thing, right? So AI, DNNs, and the compute that supports them on small platforms and where it's going, right? I think that's the paramount thing right now in this space. If I was going to go off of that and do something completely different, sort of in the cool gadget area, I think some of the hobbyist EDFs, electrically ducted fans you can buy these days, where you can build these little tiny UAVs that get 200 miles an hour, are pretty cool. That's a fun thing, just from a and then I think that even as you get to these better and better processing architectures and capabilities from an AI standpoint, I think really the limiting factor on these small systems still is and will be for a long time energy, right? So the power supplies, batteries just don't have it, right? When you get down small enough where you can't use a gas engine anymore, and you have to go to batteries or fuel cells or something like that, that is still really largely, I think, the limiting factor on some of these systems, and will be for quite a while from a performance standpoint. So if there were advancements in that field, that might be what I brought up, but there's some startup battery companies that are doing good work, but we're not there yet.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd say with all of the things that are exploding in like the UAS market related to autonomous vehicles, I think the things that are being deployed in warehouses across the country have been growing at like an amazing pace, and these autonomous vehicles are coordinating amongst each other and providing a lot of analytics back to the warehouse providers, and I think that's where you're seeing like the real impact of these autonomous vehicles, and not only like replacing human labor, but actually being much more efficient at it and providing better real-time intelligence. And it's interesting to see it all actually come in a much more tangible form, even though it's less visible because it's usually within a warehouse. But there's a lot of interesting information and coordination amongst a number of vehicles autonomously in a lot of these back rooms.
So kind of two things. I think the first part you made me think of is we're getting pushed further and further into an era of an abundance where we have more than what we need. I think it's a little ways off, but I think autonomy is going to be one of the major steps forward in that direction, where we can harness the energy of the sun. We can convert that to actual motion, into actually accomplishing something that would take physical labor. But the other thing that I'm excited about is the ability to articulate how a decision was arrived at autonomously. I think there's going to be an element of trust where there's a chasm where we're like, this seems really cool, but I don't entirely trust it yet. And the better we can articulate what is happening, I think that will drive mass adoption a little bit faster.
Excellent. Okay, the one tidbit I'll throw on the pile is also AI related. For those of you who are not familiar with how AIs are trained, they're trained through this tagging process where mostly humans will tag an object and an image to train a deep learning neural network. The most exciting thing I've seen in a little while is the automated tagging and identification and the guessing of the AI as to what the object is, which accelerates the training process. That's something I saw in a company I'm still involved with, Neurala here in town, which is kind of shocking that the AI can now start training itself by tagging the imagery. So that's the one. Okay, so we're going to open up to questions. I'm going to open up to questions on the floor. There's 2 microphones. If you've got a question for this illustrious panel, come on down. I see one brave young lad. Oh. I was referring to this gentleman here. Go ahead. Yep.
So I'm sure many people here remember this hearing in D.C. last year where the head of Stratcom, Hyten, was saying how so much of the military's operations relies on GPS and so forth. And I was wondering if, 2 questions. I was wondering if you could talk about what the efforts are in terms of both dealing with maybe encrypting our GPS, signals, and also and counteract and jamming the signals of our adversaries' drones. Maybe just generally, how are you dealing with the problem of GPS-aided navigation? Because I went to whatever it was, exploring possibilities. The open house Draper has, and I know you're doing some work with alternative guidance systems, which are really interesting. Second question is, I wondered if any of you knew about a proposal that's been put forward recently about using drones for actual ballistic missile defense in Korea. I'm not sure if any of you know about that, and if you do, if it's too classified to talk about.
About it, but then we'll have to kill you back later. Sorry.
So that's my favorite question, is how do we counter GPS? That's the area that I work in. As far as the drones to counter ballistic missiles, I don't know anything about that, I'm sorry. Draper's been doing a ton of work in that area, the GPS countering area. I work on vision-aided inertial navigation systems. So those are systems that don't require any radio signals and don't require any mapping of the environment in advance or known environments to be able to navigate through. We're getting our error. Usually the way we quantify these systems in terms of their error is a % of the distance you travel. The error is fairly linear in that. We're down to about 0.5% on some of our best systems now. So we're getting really great performance. You can go 1 kilometer with less than 10 meters of error with our drones. Another direction that we're working on that is we've got a set of technologies called Skymark at Draper, and I don't work on those, but it's this really cool set of technologies that has cameras that look at the sky, tracks satellites, and can use that to do GPS-like positioning as long as you have a view of the sky. So that's unjammable unless you're going to start making clouds, which I guess is a little bit like the Matrix. So it's been thought out a little bit, but that's a really cool example of GPS-denied technology. The kind of third direction of that people don't really think about as much is timing. So GPS is critical for our timing infrastructure. So there's been a lot of work also on miniaturizing atomic clocks. So we've got clocks that drift like less than a second in like 100 million years. And so some of that work is absolutely amazing, but I'm not too familiar with that either.
Yeah, so I mean, similar type of solutions to the same problem, right? So, you know, everything from better IMUs to reduce the drift over longer periods of time, to visual odometry, to, you know, basically taking out some of that IMU drift, to doing feature matching of whatever features those might be. So either vision-based feature matching, where you're looking at things on the ground and trying to figure out where you are, or listening to, you know, FM radio towers or whatever they are to figure out where you are using signals of interest. So there's a lot of work going on looking at alternatives to GPS.
Yeah, oddly enough, I think the reliance and impact of GPS is a bigger problem when you look at the financial industry than on things that are looking at like navigation, because they still don't have a viable alternative to switch all your financial transactions over to a different timing clock. But I think on things that rely on navigation and directioning from a GPS perspective, there's a lot of advancement in these other technology areas.
So I probably can't add anything else really meaningful to that, but check out, there's a company in the cohort right now called Notch. Check them out on the 4th floor. I won't give away any of their secret sauce, but it's worth taking a look on the subject.
Thank you.
Hi, there you go. Hi, everyone. I'm Ronnie at the MIT Enterprise Forum. I'm actually representing our live streamers today to have all their questions be vocalized. So I'll mostly be coming up here a few times, but it's not because I have my own questions. I'm just reading other people. So be ready for that. So my first question is here from Himanshi. And the first question is swarm intelligence algorithms a viable autonomous option, or is it far-fetched?
So I mean, there's been demonstrations, right? You know, going from the laboratory, we've seen a lot of sort of lab demos at MIT and UPenn and other places, and there's been some demonstrations in the wild of sort of multi-vehicle coordination. You know, so it's an area of research, I would say. It's not something that's ready for quote-unquote prime time. You know, there are fragilities associated with it, from the communication link and making sure you're sharing the right data and making sure you're robust to various types of failures. But it is certainly an active area of research in academia and at the laboratories. I'm sure it is at Draper and it is at Lincoln. So yeah, I think it's viable, but probably not quite ready yet.
Yeah, I think swarms are really exciting. I have overall very similar thoughts, but a lot of people think of swarms in very different ways. Some people think of 3 vehicles as more as being a swarm. Typically, I think of swarms as being like 50 vehicles where they're all very simple, but together they become some sort of enabling technology. And that's the way you're talking about them as well. So I would say that we're getting to the point where a lot of the necessary infrastructure algorithms can be run on these really small processors. There's some cases of like vision-aided inertial odometry, GPS-aided inertial odometry running on these really small platforms now. Also the control systems too. So I think we're just getting to the point where it becomes a really exciting area of research, but still, like you said, really a developing area. I think it's viable though.
I do think that there's a good chance that if you think of swarm behavior and swarm technology as being like a surrogate for any kind of cooperative environment of devices, that you might find that you have a number of like, you know, ground vehicles and air vehicles and a number of other things kind of in an environment together, cooperating and working together more so than this like drone-on-drone battle space of like 100 drones, you know, trying to kill each other, right? So I think it's just a matter of how you paint that scenario, but I think the idea of the swarm is you have cooperative devices.
I think the concept of human drone teaming is pretty interesting too. I don't know a lot of the tech behind it, but as an intermediate step too, of if you have someone who's still leading the pack from the human decision-making perspective, but supporting drones with them.
And on the flip side of that too is how do you have drones that convey their intentions to the people working with them?
I'll also add one little tidbit that if one is to have a large number of cooperating drones in the same proximity, I think, Chitra, you were edging on this, you kind of have to have swarming technologies and algorithms just for them to simply avoid colliding into each other and interfering with each other. So there's really kind of no choice. If you have a large number of small, inexpensive vehicles working in concert, they're going to have swarming technology of some kind to just simply prevent them from crashing and falling all over each other. All right, next.
So we opened up with the question, how could an autonomous drone mount an attack? And you guys said, oh, basically it can't happen today. But I think it could happen. In fact, you could even take away the autonomous portion. You could mount a pretty darn destructive attack today. So let me just put it out there and take it for the team and have the FBI watch me in my house. I'm gonna ask this question. So what if I were to strap 2 kilograms of an explosive on a very commercially purchasable remote control drone? We can even take the autonomy out of the portion. It's got a 7-kilometer range, moves 40 miles per hour. How are you going to defend your public politician? Are there practices already in place to defend against this sort of scenario? So you guys who might know some specific defenses already in place, then I'd love to hear, or speculatively as well.
I can speak a little bit to the policy side of that, right? So, our ability on, I think this actually came up earlier, right? So if you're overseas, it's a little bit easier to take something out. If you're here, then, you have to be able to demonstrate hostile act, hostile intent, right? So how do you know, at what point do you know that they're trying to go fly a bomb into a crowded place? So I think the policy needs to catch up a little bit with the technology. And I also think, kind of pivoting away from that a little bit, the dual-use nature of this. So everyone should care about protecting against drones, right? So football stadiums, celebrities' houses, just common areas. And I think there's a lot of different funding streams that are available to potentially invest in that technology. And maybe it's not an infrastructure that's only the federal government or only the state government that's trying to protect against these things. It's everyone's, finding a way to protect against their own property as well. But I agree, it's a very scary and compelling challenge.
And without going into any details, right? So if you take a look at open source news, right? That's essentially what ISIS and others have been doing for a couple of years now over in the Middle East, right? So it's something that people have been worried about and trying to find solutions to. If you take autonomy out of it and you're doing it remote piloted, you can try to, take out that signal. I think the French have trained, it's falcons or eagles that they're using to intercept drones. So there's a wide range of solutions potentially. Various levels of sophistication and employment, but it is what you had described is something that people are very much worried about, and people are putting effort in trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, I mean, there will be a response. It could be anything from like a shotgun to like a missile to
The Patriot missile.
to like jamming everything in sight, right? And I mean, it just comes down to what do we want out of the future of that from a domestic protection perspective, and what are we willing to deal with for collateral damage? And there's a lot of policy issues that still have to be sorted out.
Yeah, I will add to that. I am the managing director of a counter-drone accelerator, and I had to go through hundreds of applications for companies that claim to have or already had a counter-drone system. I can attest that there's many, 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 many companies out there that sell today. You can just Google counter-drone system and pick from the dozens and dozens of vendors out there. 2 big questions. One, if you shoot down a drone today, legally it's considered the same as if you shot down a 747. So you would actually go to prison for, now maybe a judge wouldn't do it if it was a drone and interfering with you, but legally speaking, you're interfering with the operation of an aircraft, okay, in much the exact same way as if you shot down a manned airplane. So there's that one little thing that's got to be sorted out. Then a lot of these counter-drone systems are quite expensive, and people don't really always feel the need for them until that first time that something bad happens, and then all of a sudden there's a mad scramble, and there'll be, unfortunately, some disaster that's going to cause the counter-drone space to spike, and there'll be ETFs and counter-drones on Wall Street, and then we'll be in business. But there's no shortage. Take it from me, it's no shortage. Next.
On a little bit of a lighter note, I have a question here from Pat. asking, how will autonomy change the corporate landscape, and what are the data implications for enterprises?
How will autonomy change the corporate landscape, and how will data change enterprises?
Yeah, how do you handle all that extra data coming in from all the drones? And the question seems to be, how do you guys expect enterprise to handle adopting drone technology, specifically autonomous drone technology?
I'll tell you, while these guys are thinking, I will also mention that there's one company in my cohort. If you go upstairs and look for the guys from Ursa, they make a drone test range data analytics platform for doing exactly this. You can ask them how many Amazon clouds they're going to need wherever they're going to need it. But this is a business, ingesting autonomous vehicle data and doing predictive analytics or malfeasance intent detection based on real-time drone telemetry data. This is a business.
So interestingly, one of the places where it's already been impacting kind of corporate responses and corporate culture and policies and stuff is it's made, I guess, because there's a lot of drones being used for surveillance and ISR type activities. There have been a number of people kind of using it for collecting data on competitors, right? So there's a lot more kind of a corporate response and like worry, I guess, in terms of like how do I kind of think about my strategy on counter UAS related to like how do I make sure my competitors not like, you know, watching everything I'm doing and trying to get an eye on like my market. There's a number of people from a market perspective that are helping kind of drive how we think about counter UAS technology for commercial applications, because it's becoming a more and more viable threat as they look at, you know, when the new, you know, car build and car releases are being tested and things like that. There's a lot of kind of corporate espionage activity. And so that might be a place where you see more kind of an early response and change in corporate behavior as it relates to UAS and counter UAS.
I think it'll be disruptive to certain industries, you know, probably not as disruptive to others. I think there's a general national competitiveness question too, in terms of how the U.S. as a country, you know, maintains an edge in that area, which is going to be, I think, an important area from a business efficiency standpoint going forward. In terms of dealing with the data back end of it, I'm not sure how it's much different than the whole IoT question and problem that so many different companies in a lot of different sectors are trying to deal with right now. We're getting lots and lots of data from lots of sensors, and we don't really know what to do with it or how to monetize it and what the business model becomes for, you know, some companies that were a little bit more sort of physical, you know, hardware focused, and now they're information focused. So I think there's a general problem there. I'm not sure if it's specific to the drone area, unless people have ideas.
The drones that I work on are logging about 1 or 2 gigabytes of data a minute. So it's a massive amount of data, and that's a research drone, but that's the raw video feed where we want to keep everything. But I think that one of the things that's going to be important is going to be like endpoint processing. So how much processing do these drones do on board? Because they're going to have to be, in effect, compressing that data and transmitting it back in some usable, manageable format. Even when we're just trying to transfer our data from our warehouse test area on the other side of Boston back here to MIT, it's like an overnight kind of process. So unless networks make a massive leap forward, I think that that's going to be really key. As far as broader enterprise and AI, it's not really my area to talk about enterprise too much, but what's exciting about neural networks is the way that they identify correlations that we might not see otherwise. And so I think that what we're going to start to see is more correlations between more things more broadly. And some companies will probably find good ways to take advantage of that.
Reminds me of a great joke. Never underestimate the bandwidth of a station wagon full of tapes. For those of you who remember tape drives. Well, I'm showing my age. Okay, let me change the joke to a bunch of CD-ROMs. Never underestimate the bandwidth of a station wagon full of CD-ROMs. Okay, Maren?
I was hoping not to get your joke, but I did. So my question actually pertains a little bit more to the regulatory framework, and Stephen alluded to some of the barriers that you all have. I'm thinking about some of the cutting-edge drone technology, not only drone, but just unmanned systems in general, looking at external U.S. markets as their primary markets because they don't want to deal with the regulatory stringencies of the FAA, or when the government contracts, they impose ITAR regulations. How are you guys handling that?
Let me jump in there first because I do have many companies that I've interviewed for my program, and there's one in my program right now. If you go upstairs and talk to Blind Tiger, Blind Tiger makes a very interesting product that pretends to be the cell phone system. So you turn on your phone and you think you're talking to AT&T or Sprint or whoever, and you're not. You're talking to his box, and he's intercepted your phone call, and he's transcribing it and tracing it, and he can drop it and do whatever he likes with it. Obviously, this is illegal, except in a few. You have to get FCC license for this. His main market is prisons. Why? Because a warden of a prison can control all the RF communications in his prison. Other markets that he's looking at, obviously, military applications. Some of the other interviewees in my program have targeted luxury yachts as their first go-to-market strategy because they're on the high seas, and the laws are, you're a captain of your ship. You're essentially the king of a little country, so you can have counter-drone systems on there. So a lot of these companies are, in fact, looking at overseas markets as their entry point because simply can't sell here. And you can spend time, effort, money fighting that battle, or just sell where you can sell right now and wait. So my answer to that question is the ones that I've seen, I've interviewed, and have led into my program are I'm going to sell where I can sell, and for the rest I'm going to wait. And there's still enough of a market in those other places that I can still make a living and amortize the development of my technology.
I can talk a little bit too. That was kind of a two-part question. The first part seemed kind of FAA regulatory, and then the second part was our acquisitions, things that we compel and strategies there. For the FAA side, I actually don't know a lot of the details that are going into that. I just know there are committees that are very actively working on how do we catch up to the drone space and the implications for that. On the acquisition side, I will say that a lot of the problems that we run into are not statute. It's not necessarily Congress that dictates we must implement ITAR, we must do X, Y, and Z rules. A lot of it's cultural, right? So we've put these policies in place in some cases, but a lot of times we have a bit of risk aversion that we're trying to overcome, right? So it's easier to do the most conservative thing on our part as the government because it's less likely to blow up in our face. But the reality is we're not actually not taking risk. We're passing on risk to the users, to the warfighter, to the people that are trying to stay safe on our soil, right? So what I have noticed personally across the Air Force at least, and some broader parts of the DoD is more of an appetite to take that risk ourselves and do the hard work of knowing when it's appropriate to do ITAR, when is it appropriate to give the IP fully to the company that's building the technology. And I've just seen a lot more of people willing to play ball in that regard because we recognize that if we don't do that, then a lot of great technologies are going to go out of country and we're not going to miss the opportunity to use them.
I think it's really tough too because in a lot of cases, you might take your technology outside of the country because it's easier to work with, but if we screw this stuff up, people get hurt, right? And so it's important to have a really good regulatory process in place. For the US, it can be really hard for us to test our drones, but we find ways to work with the system. I became a certified drone pilot yesterday, so thank you. So there's some big limitations on how you can fly a drone, but when I was going through the rules, I didn't feel like any of them were egregious. I felt like these are pretty good rules to have. I don't think we're ready to have drones flying autonomously that are well beyond line of sight at this point. I don't think that we're quite ready for that, but we're probably close. In terms of actual drone technology that can be used here, from our legal reviews, there's not that much that's covered by ITAR. So ITAR is not really a very big restriction, I think, for autonomous drones. A little bit of our stuff is covered by commerce regulations, the EAR, but in our case, I think it's mostly the source code that's covered, so that doesn't really affect startups that aren't trying to share their source code. So maybe the regulatory environment is not quite as difficult as sometimes we think it is, at least for autonomous drones.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have much else to add in this space, other than I do like living in a country that has strong privacy and safety laws. I do understand the need to push the envelope and to have the ability to test and utilize these systems. I hate to see all the technology overseas. I think it's important from a national competitive standpoint to be able to allow companies to innovate in the space. But it's good we're having that conversation. I wouldn't want us to go too far too quickly.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is on the ITAR side, this is actually an opportunity for startups, right? So it actually becomes a bigger issue for companies like Raytheon, companies that are classically in the larger UAS space that provide a lot of other, DoD and intelligence capabilities, for us to distinguish the things that are kind of outside that ITAR realm and the things that we do that are inside it. And the opportunity is there, and it's a better opportunity for people to, build the capabilities as startups and work with us, because you're less encumbered by those issues, and you have more ability to kind of work directly with Commerce and get a lot of those things cleared up. So startups should be like running crazy with it, because you have better open grounds to be able to address this capability area.
Awesome. From the viewer audience?
Yeah. So my next question here is from, I'm not going to be able to say it right, but me here. And in relation to the slaughter bots we were talking about earlier, I love that name. Do you think more regulation is needed for indoor drone usage? Whether that's for small things like espionage kind of stuff that you're talking about with a drone, or slaughter bots in indoor. What do you guys think about regulation on the indoor side of things?
I think that's hard because oftentimes it's private property, right? And that's one of the areas like warehouses and where it's getting a lot of use and a lot of play. So I think that I'm not sure if I would necessarily think of internal use as being a specific area of needing more regulation, maybe even less regulation as opposed to external use, where you're going through public spaces and crossing various property boundaries. So I don't necessarily see a need to have additional regulations on top of internal usage of drones.
Yeah, I think it's going to be less regulation and more like how you package it into like liability policies, right? Nobody really cares about how they're going to regulate. They just care who's going to pay if something happens.
Fast-moving drones are really scary indoors when they're going zipping by you. We've got drones flying by us at 20 miles an hour, and that looks really fast when it's close to you. So I think that there's probably going to be
from personal
people
experience.
Sorry, what?
Oh, it just seems you speak from very personal experience with that drone.
Yeah, I think safety is really important. We haven't really had close calls because we've been really conservative about safety. But you see some videos on YouTube where people are really getting close to drones, and I think that there's maybe, we're probably coming up on some misconceptions about them being safer than they are. As they start to be more autonomous and they start to seem understandable. There's some really fancy autonomous drones coming out these days, and it's kind of yet to be seen what their safety rates are. Not that I'm questioning them or anything, but once we start seeing things like drones being used inside of large indoor concert halls or sporting arenas, which I think people are probably going to want to do at some point, that could be kind of scary as a spectator that's beneath it.
I think there might be an opportunity here for some of the startups that are listening in of, there might be a financial market available for how do you lock down your home from these kind of drone threats? So if people start to be afraid of small drones with cameras sneaking in and spying on them, right? Or something that's going to do some kind of hostile intent. You may have a carbon monoxide detector, a smoke detector, and a drone detector that can knock out whatever shows up in your house. So it sounds kind of ridiculous, but I think the private market might be somewhere that responds versus regulation here.
Thank you.
Right. Sam?
Steve, selling to the DoD is, well, daunting for most startups. This is a drone meetup, so I'll just, looking around the room, I see at least one, I think a couple of inspection companies here. So if we imagine that Boston Drone Company, figured out how to take an infrared camera and, I don't know, inspect pipes to see if they were leaking and on a flying drone, and they wanted to go sell to the DoD, give us a sense, what would that process be like? Is that a year-long process? Is it shorter?
I love this question. So this is my bread and butter, what I've been working on. So when we started this program, we were kind of a startup in of ourselves within the government. So we did our own customer discovery, right? We went around and talked to as many startups and venture capitalists and Air Force Research Labs folks and program office. So all the people in the value chain of, how do we buy stuff and what is the perception of working with the government? Raise of hands, who here has tried to work with the government before? How's that experience been? Good, bad? Okay, so, and that's good. And that's actually some of the feedback we've gotten before is it's very difficult to work with the government. And as a result, when you're mentoring other companies, a lot of times like, oh, you got a government deal? Stay away from that one, right? So that is perception. We identified 4 main barriers to working with us. I'm going to talk through them pretty quickly here. So the first one is our acquisition timelines, right? So a startup, 9 to 12 months of runway. If we're going to take 2 to 5 years to get them on contract, they will have died many times over. So that's what the traditional, what's called the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation contract. But there are different contract mechanisms that are out there, many of which have been used by DARPA since the 90s, right? So other transactions, experimental procurements. Even within the FAR, if you're under 7.5 million, you can move really darn quick without a lot of the rules that we think always apply. So the bottom line there, as I talked about culture earlier, the tools are out there for us to buy stuff very quickly from you. It's a cultural piece, and it's us. So AFWorks has the benefit of working with the Vice Chief of Staff and A58 and some of these high-level folks who are willing to accept a little bit more risk. So we can ostensibly test out these tools that people are afraid to use because they don't want to go to jail or get fired or things that don't really happen. And then we can give them to the masses and say, hey, whatever base you're at, you can use these tools too. So if you are working with an organization that's kind of enlightened in that way, you can move quick. And we're talking, I think there's already one company within our cohort who has a deal to sell one of their products to the government. It's only been going for about a month and a half, 2 months now. So that's the first piece, is timelines. The second one is restrictive requirements. So our requirements process has to do with us articulating what our needs are and then presenting that to industry so that they can come back and give us answers. If we're too restrictive, we aren't allowing folks to innovate, right? We're not being innovative ourselves, and we also risk overlooking a viable solution that exists outside of our understanding what a solution should look like, right? So maybe we need to see over a hill. All we want to do is see over the hill, but what we say is in the requirement, I want a satellite that sits in geo and has X, Y, and Z parameters. What we should say is just, I need to see over the hill. And we don't care if you show us a flock of carrier pigeons or a hot air balloon or a drone. That all gets after us, but if we have an improperly scoped requirement, we can't actually tap into those solutions. The third one is access, and that really says like, hey, who do I go and talk to? And that's probably the biggest one, is how do you access our people, our problems, and our data? The first piece for that is there's a website, AFWERX, afworksdc.org. And we've created essentially a portal for, hey, you got a cool piece of tech? If you apply here and just say 10 sentences, or it's like 10 different fields that are really easy to fill out, not some long proposal, what happens is that gets into our system, and we're creating a neural network of sorts that will connect your company to the right people in the government that are possibly interested in buying that. Also, the Tech Accelerator. So what we have created is a way for us to articulate our needs in a very broad way to startups, to industry, to anyone who wants to potentially work with us. Counter-drone was the subject matter of this one, but we had it under the broad guise of autonomous technology. So anyone, there's the broad requirements piece, right? Anyone could throw their solutions to us there. Those solutions were then reviewed by operators who would be using the technology, by the program managers who would be buying the technology, and then by the technologists who understand it. So the folks at the labs, the folks who are used to building this kind of tech. And those 3 informed which teams that we selected, right? So throughout this 3-month process of the accelerator, there's constant interaction that's occurring between the people building the technology, so the startup teams, and the people that are going to buy the technology. And what that allows us to do is be more likely to have those teams build something we actually want to use. So that solves the third one. The big fourth one is perception. And that's why a lot of people who raise their hand kind of are like, oh, it sucked, is we have had a history of bad interactions. And I promise you, the large ship that is the DoD is slowly turning towards a culture of being more risk aware and not risk averse. So taking those smart risks, of trying new things, trying out these new tools, and then being more innovative and working with folks like you guys. So our job is to not only satisfy those first 3 barriers, but do it in a public way that we get the message out there to folks that we're open for business. It's a very good question, and we're working on it. Yes.
So before anybody else jumps in, I'll just tack on to that. The 4 captains of the apocalypse, of which Steve is amongst them, are also responsible for, let me just back up a little bit. I built my company off of SBIRs, never took venture capital or any investor money of any kind, so I've been through this process gruelingly for many, many years. And then for some number of years, I taught how to write SBIRs and BAAs at the other TechStars program, the regular Boston TechStars program. And I would be a big advocate for writing SBIRs because you can use that instead of giving away your money to venture capitalists. But whenever I would teach this class, and Steve conveyed a lot of the objections, the first question I would get from a class of companies that were not particularly interested in doing government work, but were open to it. So this was a pretty fair demographic of sort of open-minded startups. The first question was, well, who owns the IP? And it turns out that, at least in the SBIR program, the government's very generous with that. The company owns the IP. The government just doesn't want to be charged large amounts of royalties later on for buying the product. Second question is usually, well, what does the proposal look like? Okay, and unfortunately, with the SBIR phase ones, there were 25-page proposal, which no 3-person startup who had not done it before many times would ever bother. So half the room would clear out at that point. And then the next question was, okay, well, if I write this 25-page proposal, then how long do I have to wait for my money? Okay, and Steve, well, you might get a notification in 8 weeks that you won, and another 3 months later, you have the actual contract, and then the first check, so 7, 8, 9 months. The room is empty at this point. Nobody's in there. I'm scratching my head like, man, this is free money. Why don't you guys go for it? So I will say that the 4 captains of the apocalypse, in fact, listened to a lot of these horror stories, and there's a new variant of the SBIR program that's coming out in the next Air Force Rev. Am I allowed to talk about this?
I don't mind. We're
Okay.
working through the
All
details.
right.
Go for it.
Where the phase 1 proposal is just a set of PowerPoint slides. Award of the contract is supposed to be 30 to 60 days. And the phase 2 of the SBIR, if those are familiar with it, is no longer a cost plus fixed fee labor contract. It's simply the purchase of more prototypes through a regular commercial purchase order, okay? So it's a complete revamp of the SBIR program to simply resemble the way small businesses do business with everybody else on earth. And it's an experiment, but a guy named Bill Harrison at AFRL in Dayton, Ohio, came up with the idea, we were all looking at each other at dinner one night and said, can we do this? I don't know, is this possible? And he went and talked to an Air Force lawyer, and he's like, yeah, there's no reason you can't do it. So I think once this comes out and is used this first time in the middle of this year by one part of the DoD, it's going to be a landslide, and it's going to wind up converting over an incredibly large, I believe, an incredibly large percentage of SBIR money into this new buying format, which is vastly curtailed time-wise and simplicity as far as the proposal goes. So keep an eye out.
So I can neither confirm nor deny the details of that, but we are addressing the SBIR process. And if you think about it, that's billions of dollars across the government of non-dilutive capital. So as you're building out your businesses, that's a way that you can maintain your equity and build something great.
And having said all this, I'm not an employee of the Air Force, and I have no definitive knowledge of how it's exactly going to come out. So the whole thing could be, killed tomorrow, and I'm a liar. Anybody else have any comments on this question?
I'd just say kind of quickly that Draper's identified a lot of those same problems, and different approaches. They set up this new office called Sembler that I think is really cool, that can help connect startups to the funding agencies that they might not know about or not have an in with. So Draper's got a lot of really smart and well-connected program managers that know their customer spaces really well that we can help you get connected to.
I will say that a lot of times I find that smaller companies and startups look more for like the BAAs and SBIRs that they can respond to. And you could also get some value out of looking at, awarded large IDIQs and basically like pitching the large defense contractors that own those. Like we're always looking for better ways to hit the ceiling on our contracts and find innovative things to put in front of our customers. And if you have a category of capability that hits some of these, larger existing awarded programs, just, hit up the contractors that own it. And that might be an easier path than you doing all the legwork on a new contract and waiting for 9 months.
I'll also double down on that shout out to the Draper Sembler program, and Nathan Wiedemann is doing a great job there. MITRE is also doing a pretty good job. Marissa, I want you to wave your hand there. Marissa McCoy from MITRE is helping out with a similar effort at MITRE. And the last one, Lincoln Labs, had several conversations with them. They know they have to do it. They're working up a plan right now, a tad behind their brethren at Draper and MITRE, but Lincoln's on the warpath as well. So it's definitely catching on. So we have time for one last question. This gentleman right there, go ahead.
Hi there. My name's Peter. I live here in Boston, but quite some time ago I lived in Germany. I actually worked for Raytheon and was helping to install a new air traffic control system at the time. So you piqued my curiosity about the differences in privacy regulations and other regulations that would affect deployment of drones in Europe. I'm just wondering, I haven't heard much about, so in Europe, I assume it's more, there's more regulation there. What is it like, or do you know what that environment is like from your perspectives?
So one of the things that happened is a few years ago, I don't know if you remember, there was this video with Angela Merkel like on TV, and a drone came and flew like right down in front of her on the stage, and her entire security team like stood there and didn't know what to do. There's no protocol. There was absolutely nothing that they were prepared for, and they walked away. And I think at that moment, they all said, "Oh my God, we have to do something. We have to have a strategy. We have to have some sort of policy in place. We need to like start stepping up on what the technology capabilities are." And all of a sudden, the landscape shifted in Europe, and a lot more money got funded or put it towards funding for a lot of the capability that you see out there, and a lot more policy got directed, and there's just a lot. The appetite changed because of that large public event. We haven't had a similar event that has completely fundamentally changed policy here. We have a lot of little things that have kind of informed how we're looking at it. But I think when you see those type of things, those things and those more public events are what really shapes those policy decisions. And so right now in Europe, they're all doubled down on finding better counter-US solutions across the board. But there are smaller countries that have less infrastructure and have, I think we tend to be more privacy-oriented than a lot of countries in Europe. So they have a little more freedom on how they think about policy.
I honestly am not familiar with the policies in Europe currently relating to UAVs.
Not either, but I've been at outdoor events here in the United States where drones have been flown over them, and I know that's not legal. There's definitely been cases where I've seen somebody, I think it's just somebody curious, but I think that we're talking a lot about people who are malicious, but it's going to be a big problem for all the people who are just curious. Maybe you couldn't get tickets to that concert, so you thought, I'll just fly my drone and watch it that way, but drones aren't that reliable, so an accident could happen.
Yeah, I actually don't know anything about that either.
Great.
The only piece that I will add is that Techstars also has a vertical program in Los Angeles that is funded by the music industry. Companies that all have some technology somehow related to music production, displaying, whatever. And my counterpart there, the managing director there, a great guy, as soon as he heard about me, ran down and grabbed me and said, "Hey, all of my sponsors, all the big music companies who are producing these outdoor shows, outdoor venues, are starving for counter-drone solutions. What do you got for me?" Why? Because they're concerned about bootlegging. A drone flying in and then streaming out the data on an HD video stream, simulcasting for free, or a recording, recording video. They're also concerned about the safety aspects too of somebody flying in some kind of weapon of some kind. So that industry is extraordinarily hungry, and they will do whatever they have to do legality-wise to control the airspace. And if you think about it, the counter-drone problem in that arena is hard, because you can't just shoot down the invading drone, because it will hit a bunch of your clients in the head, or if it's got some weapon on it of some kind, you don't want it hitting the ground. So all of a sudden it becomes a very interesting problem of jamming it in the parking lot before it ever gets there, or when if it does in fact get to the final stage of getting into the arena, how do you successfully grab it and remove it?
Is this where swarms might help?
Maybe. Well, with that, it is 7:31. We're exactly on time. I'm going to remind everybody to please go up to the 4th floor to see the exhibit area. Fascinating companies up there. About half of them are from my program, half of them from the rest of the drone and counter-drone and autonomy community of Boston. Let's please give our panelists a nice round of applause. Dude.